Hello and welcome to Grognard Solo Gaming. I am the Grognard, and today we are not continuing with Curse of Strahd in the usual sense, but instead we are doing something I am calling Tales from Barovia. And what is that? Well, it is a way of playing other games than Dungeons & Dragons and to temporarily move away from the soldiers of Satramelin, while staying in Barovia and telling stories that either serve as parallels or prequels to the main adventure. But the usual adventure is going to continue normally using the same format and the 2014 D&D rules, and there is no need to follow the Tales from Barovia series in order to understand or keep up with the Curse of Strahd episodes. You will, however, have to be familiar with the Curse of Strahd story in order to understand the Tales from Barovia episodes. But if your interest is in the solo gaming aspect of the episodes, then you can watch them without the story. So, Tales from Barovia episodes are probably going to be shorter and a bit more experimental, and their format is going to vary, although this one is going to be the usual story style. Also, this new series is going to be a way for me to finish last year's SoloRPG challenge that was created by Lekkis from the Caverna Lekkis channel that is going to be linked below. Because there is no challenge for 2025, I figured better late than never. So, this episode of Tales from Barovia is going to be played using no dice, as that was the challenge that was for July, and it is the one that is next in line for me. So this story is based on a session played using the Gamemaster's Apprentice horror deck, and it is going to be linked below. And when and how I used the cards is going to be shown on the screen during the episode, in case you're curious about that. And then I will say a few words about it all at the end. So, with all that out of the way, let's find out what Madame Eva does after she has talked to Janos in the graveyard. To most people, the afternoon is cold and damp, but Madame Eva finds it crisp and invigorating. She has seen enough Barovian days to know that this, in reality, is nice weather. Once she is out of sight of any prying eyes, she straightens her back and walks briskly into the forested area northeast of the mound where Janos first appeared. The trees are old, tall, and gnarled, with low branches that reach like arms and hands in every direction. The fortune teller puts her hand in her left pocket and touches the Taroka deck she is always carrying there. The familiar feeling of the cards help her remember her visions, and she's really going to need that help right now, as all the trees look alike. It takes a little longer than she had hoped to find the hollow tree she is looking for, but once she does, she's relieved to see that the blood-crusted sack is still inside. Dealing with the future is rarely a certain thing, not even for someone as experienced and skilled at divination as herself. Madame Eva unties the sack and reaches within, producing the mostly dried up but partially rotting head of Doju Dornovich, another victim of her false prophecies. Well, technically they are true, the odds just weren't in the receiver's favor. This fool had never known, but she had spoken to the so-called Wizard in Black, much like she had to so many others that sought to oppose Strahd. Already at that time it had been clear that things needed to change, that a new approach was needed, but she had not dared risk anything of her own at that point. So she had suggested to the wizard, who was technically more of a sorcerer, that he should recruit locals for his endeavor. However, the only change that had resulted in was in the number of casualties. The fortune teller takes out a small knife and cuts a piece of dried and partially burnt flesh from the head. The flesh of a ghoul would have been better, but it wasn't so easy to come by. And the group of adventurers she had sent to retrieve ghoul parts had never come back. According to her cards, their corpses were floating in the swamps around Beres, so vampire spawn flesh it would have to be. As her knife cuts into the dried out neck of the severed head, the stink of rotting flesh disappears, as does the background smells of damp bark and earth. Instead, the old woman's nostrils are taken over by a sweet aroma like that of almond oil. She smiles a mirthless smile because she knows what the smell heralds. So, this spectacle is cruel enough to warrant a visit, is it? Ha! I thought it might be. There is no reply, and Madame Eva doesn't know if she has been heard or not. Having sheathed and pocketed her knife, she brings out a small jar from her satchel and places the piece of flesh inside of it. It is an unnecessary precaution, really. She had, after all, planned to throw the satchel away as soon as possible because of the pie currently sitting at its bottom. It was disgusting, just like Morgantha's idiot children who had baked it. How the bloodline had fallen. To believe their grandmother was the legendary Baba Yaga, the terrifying Iron Witch herself. Madame Eva shakes her head and sighs. It wouldn't matter for much longer, though. As long as they had gotten the recipe somewhat right, the pie would serve its purpose. The fortune teller sighs again and gingerly places the jar next to the pie, which has already been a bit malformed from the bottle of wine lying on top of it. Madame Eva closes her satchel, then, as quickly as she can, she returns the sack with the severed head to the tree. After that, she heads due south into the village of Barovia. As she crosses the village square, she can see Irina Serafine Donovich and the orphan child whose name she cannot remember. They are standing far down the street to the east, but they pay her no mind. The smell of almond oil comes and goes on the wind, and the shadows deepen all around as Madame Eva makes her way further south. Seeing white numbers painted on several of the doors makes her chuckle. Friedrich Dümmler certainly is an interesting character, and she has seen him so many times in the Executioner Taroka card, she feels like she knows him. Her time for pondering the cleric and his impact on the future quickly comes to an end, however, as she reaches her destination. Mary Blinsky's house sits quiet and dark in its lot, and Madame Eva can already sense the grief hanging in the air. The poor woman, first her husband left her all those years ago, leaving her alone with a child she tried all too desperately to prevent from leaving too, and now that had come to pass. And, as was so often the case, it had been the struggle to prevent the event that had ended up causing it. If only people had the ability to see the future, even just a little bit, how much suffering they could have been spared. Madame Eva reaches the broken door that is leaning against the doorpost. She simply grabs it and holds it while she moves by, all while trying to act as if it is heavy, just in case someone is watching. Hoping she hasn't brought any attention to herself, the fortune teller moves deeper into the house as quickly as she can, so she will no longer be visible to anyone in the street or the neighboring houses. From reading her cards, she knows where to find Mary, and she heads straight upstairs. Just like in Madame Eva's visions, Mary sits on a chair in her bedroom clutching a doll. The fortune teller wonders if the other woman even remembers that it is her husband who has made the doll. At this point, she might not even remember that her last name is Blinsky. Madame Eva draws on her magic and speaks a simple command. "Mary, wake up." "What? Where am I? Madame Eva? My lady, I did not think I would ever see you again. Everything you said has come to pass. My daughter, Gertruda, she's gone, just like... There was someone else, wasn't there? Someone else who left me. We have talked about that in the past, haven't we?" Madame Eva starts to drag a table across the floor to place it by Mary. Once she's done, she says, "Yes, your husband, Gadolf. He was cursed. He left to keep Gertruda safe from his demons." Gadolf, Mary sighs. "I cannot remember him." The fortune teller shrugs and places her satchel on the table. The other woman looks at what she's doing and asks, "Is everything all right? You seem somber." "I am worried about you, Mary. Your health is waning, I'm afraid." Madame Eva can see the shadows in the room grow deeper, and she hurries up, putting the jar, the wine, and the pie on the table. "You brought me food? You shouldn't have. You're too kind, my lady." The fortune teller takes out a glass and cutlery from another compartment of her satchel. She places the pie and the glass in front of Mary before she fills the glass with wine and hands her the cutlery. "Just a second. First, take this medicine." She opens the jar and hands Mary the piece of flesh from the vampire spawn's neck. The other woman receives the blackened piece of flesh, but despite her best efforts to seem appreciative, her disgust is obvious. I have to eat it?" Madame Eva nods. "Yes, it's a charred intellect devourer. It's good for your brain. Chew it quickly and swallow it with wine. You'll be fine. And it's meat pie. It's delicious and goes well with the wine. Trust me, you'll love it." Mary does as instructed, all while struggling not to gag, but the horrible taste of the charred flesh is soon replaced with that of the wine, and the Barovian woman looks at the bottle, seeing it is Champagne du l'Estompe. She nearly chokes. "My lady, please do not waste such fine wine on me." Madame Eva laughs. "So, the wine you remember? I guess I shouldn't be surprised. The wine is the life to so many Barovians after all. It's for you though, so please enjoy it. And it has been specially preserved since the Martikovs produced the last bottle." "My sincerest thank yous, my lady." Mary half raises from her chair and bows. Then she sits down and begins to eat the pie. "This is delicious. Is it chicken?" "Mm-hmm." The fortune teller forces herself not to look bothered, but finds she has to look away. Her eyes land on the unnaturally dark shadows that are now enveloping the room. It seems her looking has made the other woman aware of the growing darkness, and she says, "What time is it? Is it nightfall already?" She starts to get up, probably to look out the window, but Madame Eva stops her by placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry about it. Just enjoy your meal." "Of course. Where are my manners? Thank you again, my lady. You are much too kind. This is the best wine and food I have ever had in my entire life." "That's good, and it will soon take effect. So you should lie down." "Take effect? What do you mean? I don't understand." "Just lie down. It's the medicine. It will make you drowsy. Just take a nap." "Yes, I think I'm beginning to feel a bit lightheaded. Is that why it is so dark?" Madame Eva helps the other woman to her bed. "I'm sorry, Mary, but it has to be 6 people tomorrow. The cards were very clear about that." "What? 6 people? What's going on?" Mary feels as if she should be worried, but she simply isn't. Her body feels relaxed, and an undeniable happiness is taking her over at the same time that she is becoming more and more drowsy. "Remember, Mary, when you see the laughing man, say yes. Don't think, don't be afraid, just say yes. It is the only way you will be able to save Gertruda when you wake up. I will leave a letter here with instructions for you to follow tomorrow." Madame Eva puts the leftovers of the pie and the mostly empty wine bottle back in her satchel, together with the other things she had brought. Then she reaches into one of her hidden pockets and takes out a letter and places it on the table. When she's done, she looks at Mary, who is sleeping and moving her eyes under her eyelids. The fortune teller turns to a half-open wardrobe, where the unnatural darkness is the thickest. "There, it is done. I don't know what twisted sense of pleasure you derive from this, but the show is over. Go back to wherever it is you dwell." An ice-cold wind comes from one of the corners and sweeps the room, leaving all the soggy patches of wood covered in frost. Madame Eva knows what it means, and she knows she shouldn't look at the darkness for too long, or things would start to appear inside of it. Things that terrified even her. The last time she encountered the darkness, she became whatever heartless thing it now is that she finds herself to be. And that time she had looked away. She had not dared to even glimpse the things she could sense in the darkness. If only this thing, this darkness, had shown up in her readings, if only her cards had prepared her for this moment. She doesn't like rash decisions, but the darkness was simply beyond all of her psychic abilities and readings. Still, she knows so much more now. She has found the forbidden words, the Catrian Grammaton, Anachronite, and Agori Nivasa. Words whose pages had been ripped out from the history books. And deep down she knows she wants to know more. She wants to understand the darkness. Because even though Taroka reveals much, it is always the things she cannot learn that she wants to know most of all. So much time has passed, and she has so much more power and knowledge. Surely she could handle a second or two of looking. It could tell her so much more than any of the books. She has to know. Without another thought, Madame Eva gazes into the darkness. It is a bitter mistake, but she doesn't realize. After an endless fraction of an infinite second, the fortune teller is completely insane, screaming and clawing her own eyes out. There are no words for what she has seen. It is truly unspeakable. If Madame Eva ever recovers, whatever she saw in Mary's house will be nothing but a blank spot in her memory, a thing her mind simply cannot hold, and the only suggestion that it ever really existed at all is going to be the fortune teller's nightmares. And that is going to be where we leave the story this time. If you made it this far and you liked the episode, you can let me know with the button. And if you want to see where the story goes next, you're most welcome to subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you have anything you would like to say, positive or negative, or that you want to ask about, please leave a comment. I always read every comment and I always respond. About the GMA cards, I think they are excellent and they are some of my most used solo gaming tools, though I usually use the fantasy deck. And concerning the horror deck, it can be good to know that everything is strongly horror themed, so if you want to play a more normal game with elements of horror, it's better to have 2 decks and only draw from the horror one when it's appropriate, or you need to be prepared to tone down the prompts from the cards before you bring them into the game. The horror deck is also made for modern settings, so some prompts won't be usable in a fantasy game or historical game. Also, because the challenge was not to use dice, I didn't use the printed dice values, even though it would have made sense in some places, and because I had a pretty good idea about the ingredients for the story, when it was not a yes or no question, I looked at the hold card every time and simply picked the thing that I found most inspiring or most appropriate. And finally, I just have to mention that drawing the card with Eerie Doll on it for Mad Mary, who is actually holding an Eerie Doll, made me laugh. The chance was 1 in 120, but I do find these types of synchronicities happen quite often when I'm solo gaming. So, all in all, I highly recommend the GMA decks for solo gaming, and playing without dice is a good challenge for variation and creativity. So a big thank you to Lekkis for last year's challenge. For the next episode, the challenge is going to be to use an indie system or resource. And I'm not going to say what that is going to be, but I'm very much looking forward to it as it is something that's going to be quite novel. Going forward, I hope to make 1 episode of Curse of Strahd and 1 episode of Tales from Barovia every month or so, but if I have to prioritize, it will be the usual Curse of Strahd episodes that get made first. That's it for this episode, and I thank you very much for watching or listening, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.